Today, we uncover the 8 milk brands the UK should be warning about. We reveal the truth about that white liquid sitting in your fridge, that the milk we grew up trusting, the milk our parents poured, the milk our grandparents swore by, has quietly changed, one betrayal at a time. Because somewhere along the line, milk stopped being milk and started becoming a processed product that still looked the part, but only in the same way a knockoff looks like the real thing. For decades, we've been told to drink milk because it's good for our bones, because it's natural. Yet behind the supermarket shelves, an entirely different story is playing out. A story of cows being fed industrial mixes, fillers, and even in some cases, things like expired sweets. In the US, there was an infamous case of a truck spilling thousands of defected red Skittles, and officials later admitted they were being used as cattle feed. And UK government guidance even allows properly processed sweets, chocolate, and bakery waste to be used in animal feed. It's a story of feed mixes laced with additives replacing pure natural grass. A story of filters, heat treatments, mechanical processes, and shelf-life tricks replacing the real thing. And here's the part nobody talks about. Just a few decades ago, milk used to come in glass bottles, delivered fresh, with nothing between you and the product except the cow that made it. Today, almost all of it arrives in plastic because plastic fits the needs of industry far more than the needs of the consumer. And it goes deeper than processing. We've reached a point where we're giving cows additives not to make the milk better, not to improve their well-being, but simply to manage the consequences of a system that refuses to let them eat what they were born to eat. Because we've created a world where some cows haven't seen a single blade of grass in their entire life. And as we're slowly realizing, they don't treat us or that differently either. We're fed things the corporations design in ways they decide, and then we're left to deal with the long list of side effects. But this isn't about fear, it's about truth. Every time we peel back another layer, we realize the same thing. Nature makes food simple. The greed of the few makes it complicated. So today we're lifting the lid not for fear, but to inform, to empower, and to bring back the standards we deserve. Number 1. Cravendale filtered milk. Cravendale is the perfect example of how far modern milk has drifted from the real thing. Because this isn't just milk anymore, it's milk that has been run through a system so heavy, so mechanical, and so unnatural that most people have no idea what they're actually pouring. The branding tells you it's purer and fresher, but the more you look into it, the more you realize filtering doesn't just remove what's harmful, it removes what's natural. The good bacteria, the natural structures, the soft flavors that come from cows eating real grass, all stripped away to create a liquid that can sit on a supermarket shelf for weeks at a time. And here's the part people are only just waking up to. The farming system behind this milk is moving further and further away from nature. We reached a point where the industry is experimenting with additives for cows, not to improve the milk, not for welfare, but to manage the side effects of keeping animals indoors, eating diets they were never meant to eat. That's the direction the supply chain is heading, and Cravendale sits right inside that industrial pipeline. None of this shows up on the carton, but it shows up in the taste. People call it creamy, but what they taste isn't the richness of grass-fed milk. It's the sweetness that comes from processing, from filtration, from removing certain compounds and concentrating others. And because the milk behind Cravendale isn't coming from organic or pasture-based systems that the same indoor grain-heavy farms used for budget milk, the final product feels more like a manufactured beverage than something poured straight from a cow. Cravendale is marketed and priced as a premium product, but peel back the label and what you're looking at is a long-life industrial liquid shaped by machinery, not by nature. Number 2. Tesco Everyday Value Milk. Tesco Everyday Value Milk is exactly what happens when the price tag becomes the priority and everything else becomes negotiable.
At 90 pence for 2 litres, it raises a simple question. How many corners have to be cut for milk to reach that price? The answer becomes clear the moment you look behind the label. This milk comes from large-scale indoor systems where cows rarely touch pasture. They're kept inside, fed grain-heavy diets, and pushed for maximum output. And when animals are living in conditions built around volume instead of well-being, the quality of the milk inevitably reflects the system behind it. People often assume milk is milk, but the diet of the cow changes everything. Grass-fed milk naturally contains more beneficial fats like omega-3s and CLA, while grain-fed milk shifts towards higher omega-6s and a flatter nutrient profile. That difference won't be listed on the carton, but it shows up in the flavor, the richness, and even the way milk behaves in a hot drink. Value milk often separates quickly because the proteins have been stressed by both the cow's diet and the aggressive processing used to stabilize such large batches. And then there's the direction the farming system itself is moving. These large-scale suppliers are part of the same industrial pipeline where feed additives are being trialed to manage the side effects of indoor farming, not to improve the milk, not to help the cows, but to compensate for a system that keeps pushing nature further away. It's not on the label, but it's part of the wider picture. The processing reflects that same mindset. Ultra-high heat treatments keep the milk shelf-stable through long logistics chains, but they also wipe out the natural bacteria and delicate structures that make fresh milk taste like fresh milk. That's why Tesco Value Milk often separates in hot drinks and tastes slightly metallic or sweet. It's a product shaped by machinery, not by pasture. Tesco Everyday Value is affordable, yes, but affordability is only meaningful when the product itself maintains its standards. And once you see how this milk is produced, you realize the cost isn't just the price you pay at the till, but the compromises built into every litre.
Number 3. Aldi Everyday Essentials Milk. Aldi's Everyday Essentials milk is sold as the no-nonsense, budget-friendly option, but the simplicity stops at the label. Behind the scenes, this milk moves through one of the most industrial supply chains in Europe. Much of Aldi's milk is sourced from large networks across the UK and EU, where milk from many different farms is pulled together long before it reaches the bottle. When milk is blended at this scale, any idea of knowing how the cows lived or what they were fed disappears completely. And the feeding system matters. Grain-heavy diets create milk that is flatter, thinner, and lower in the natural richness that comes from cows grazing outdoors. These are high-yield herds, raised for volume, not quality. Many of the farms supplying this range rely on indoor housing systems, where the cow's environment is controlled and efficiency is the priority. And when animals live this way, the wider system inevitably looks for ways to manage the side effects of indoor farming. That's why these large-scale suppliers move in the same direction as others, trialing feed additives to manage the side effects of indoor farming. Not something consumers ever see on the label, and not something that changes the milk itself, but a clear sign of how far the system has moved from simple grass-fed principles. Aldi's Everyday Essentials may be cheap, but it's cheap because the whole system behind it is built around cutting corners, not delivering quality. Number 4. Sainsbury's Basics Milk. Sainsbury's Basics Milk is exactly what you get when milk is treated as a volume product instead of a food with standards. This range doesn't come from pasture-based farms or small herds, it comes from the lowest cost end of the industrial supply chain. These are large, indoor operations where cows live on grain mixes instead of grass, and the milk itself reflects that. Grain-heavy feeding produces thinner, paler milk with a noticeably flatter taste. And because this range pulls from milk that often doesn't make the cut for higher tiers, you're not getting the creamier fats or fuller flavor you'd find in milk from cows raised outdoors. The supply chain behind Basics Milk leans on consistency above all else. To achieve that, the processing is intense. High heat, aggressive homogenization, and long-distance logistics that demand a product stable enough to survive the journey. Natural bacteria, delicate proteins, and subtle flavors are simply collateral damage in this system.
That's why this milk often separates in hot drinks and tastes almost chalky or chemical. The processing is doing the heavy lifting because the farming system isn't. And just like other large supermarket ranges, the farms supplying Basics milk sit inside the same industrial direction as suppliers experimenting with feed additives to manage the side effects of indoor farming. Not something consumers ever see on the label, and not something that changes the milk itself, but a clear sign of how far the system has moved from simple grass-fed principles. Sainsbury's Basics isn't just cheap milk. It's milk shaped by economies of scale, industrial targets, and compromises that start long before the bottle reaches the shelf. 5. Asda Smart Price Milk. Asda Smart Price Milk follows the same pattern as most budget tier milks. Low price on the shelf, high cost in the farming system behind it. This range is sourced from multiple suppliers across the UK and Europe, with contracts that shift based purely on price. One week the milk might come from a UK farm, the next from a completely different EU supplier. When sourcing jumps around like that, traceability disappears. You can't know how the cows lived, what they were fed, or what standards were followed, because everything gets mixed together long before it reaches the bottle. Farms supplying this range tend to operate on intensive indoor systems. Cows are kept inside, fed grain-based diets, and pushed to produce high volumes. Milk from animals living this way naturally carries a thinner texture and a flatter taste, and the nutrient profile is never as rich as milk that comes from grass and pasture. Large, mixed batches like these also require heavier processing, strong homogenization, heat treatments, and stabilization to make everything look uniform despite coming from dozens of different farms. And just like other big supply networks, the farms behind Asda's milk fall within the same direction where feed additives are being explored to manage the side effects of intensive indoor farming. It's not on the label, and it's not something the milk carries, but it's part of the direction the whole system is moving in. Smart Price may be one of the cheapest options in the dairy aisle, but cheaper milk always comes with a story. And once you understand this system behind it, the low price begins to make a lot more sense than the milk itself. Number 6. Lidl Simply Fresh Milk. Lidl Simply Fresh Milk is marketed as straightforward, reliable, everyday milk, but the simplicity implied on the label doesn't match the complexity behind the supply chain. Much like other discount ranges, this milk is sourced from large industrial networks where milk from multiple farms and sometimes multiple countries is pooled together into enormous batches. Once that milk enters the tanker, any sense of origin or farming standard disappears. You don't know which farm it came from, how those cows were raised, or whether their diets were based on grass or grain, because it all gets blended into one anonymous mix. The farming systems supplying this range typically rely on indoor housing, controlled diets, and high-yield production. Grain-based feeding is the norm, and that always shows up in the final product. Thinner texture, milder flavor, and a nutrient profile that doesn't match the richness of milk from cows grazing outdoors. To stabilize such massive mixtures, the milk undergoes strong homogenization and high-heat processing designed to make every bottle look identical, even if the milk inside came from dozens of different sources. And just like the rest of the industrial supply chain, the farms behind Lidl's milk fall within the same direction where feed additives are being explored to manage the side effects of intensive indoor farming. It's not listed on the carton, and it's not something the milk carries, but it tells you exactly how far the system has shifted from the simplicity consumers expect. Simply Fresh isn't the worst milk on the shelves, but it's far from fresh in the way most people imagine. It's the product of scale, not of pasture.
Number 7. Morrison's Savers Milk. Morrison's Savers Milk is one of the clearest examples of how budget milk reflects the system behind it, not the story on the label. This range is sourced from the lowest cost end of the supply chain, where milk from multiple farms and sometimes multiple countries is pooled together long before bottling. When milk is blended on this scale, the consumer loses every meaningful detail. You can't know which farm it came from, what the cows were fed, or whether those cows ever saw a blade of grass. Everything becomes a uniform white liquid shaped by logistics, not by farming.
The farms supplying this range are typically intensive indoor operations. High-volume production, grain-based feeding, and minimal access to pasture all come together to create milk that's thinner, paler, and far less rich than milk from cows raised outdoors. And because the quality of the raw milk varies so much between suppliers, the processing has to compensate. Ultra-high heat treatments, strong homogenization, and long storage periods are common, all designed to stabilize milk that may be days old before it even reaches the regional depot. These farms also sit within the same industrial direction as others, trialing feed additives designed to manage the pressures of indoor farming. Not to improve the milk, not to help the cows, but to keep the system running at high speed. It's not something you'll ever see on the label, but it tells you everything about where the industry is heading. Morrison's Savers may save money, but it doesn't save standards. It's the kind of milk that looks fine in the bottle, but once you understand the system behind it, the low price becomes the least interesting part of the story. Number 8. Muller Fresh Whole Milk. Muller is one of the most recognizable names in British dairy, which is exactly why most people never question it. The branding looks premium, the bottle looks reassuring, and the name carries weight. But once you look behind the label, you find a system that's far more industrial than most shoppers realize. Muller sources milk from a huge network of farms across the UK, with thousands of suppliers contributing to the same pool. When milk from that many farms is blended together, you lose all traceability. You don't know how those cows lived, what they were fed, or what standards applied on each farm because everything ends up in the same tanker anyway. These farms also sit within the same industrial direction as others, trialing feed additives designed to manage the pressures of indoor farming. Not to improve the milk, not to help the cows, but to keep the system running at high speed. It's not something you'll ever see on the label, but it tells you everything about where the industry is heading. Muller looks like a premium choice, but once you peel back the branding, it's simply one of the biggest players in the same industrial system, shaping all the lowest cost milk on the shelf.
Now, let's talk about the milk that's actually worth your time. The milk that still respects the basics: grass, sunlight, and simplicity. 3 brands in the UK consistently rise above the rest: Yo Valley Organic, Waitrose Duchy Organic, and Rachel's Organic. What makes these stand out isn't fancy packaging or clever marketing, it's the farming. These brands come from systems that prioritize pasture, not production lines. Their cows spend far more time outdoors, eating the food they were born to eat, real grass. And when cows eat grass, everything changes. The milk becomes naturally richer, creamier, and higher in beneficial fats like omega-3s and CLA. You can taste the difference because the cow lived differently. Yo Valley Organic is often the gateway for people who want to step away from industrial milk without spending a fortune. It's organic, pasture-led, and transparent about its farming practices. For a supermarket brand, it gets closer to what milk used to be. Waitrose Duchy Organic goes even further. This is the gold standard of supermarket milk: strict organic rules, strong welfare protection, and a genuine emphasis on quality over quantity. It's the closest you'll get to farm direct milk without actually visiting a local dairy. Rachel's Organic is smaller, but incredibly consistent. Their milk has a depth and natural sweetness that only comes from cows living more naturally, without the shortcuts or industrial expectations. None of these brands are perfect, but in a world where milk is increasingly shaped by feed formulas, industrial additives, and long-life processing, these 3 keep things simple: grass, space, time. That's what creates real milk, not machinery. Thanks for listening, and remember, stay aware, stay sharp, and protect your plate.